Okay, hi everybody. Let me close the door. It's Monday, it's 1 o'clock, and we are continuing our ongoing series of Pirkei Avot history and Hashkafa. The mission that we last discussed, or we're in the middle of discussing, is towards the end, there's almost the very end of the second chapter, and it reads as follows. It's number 14. Rabbi Elazar says, or he used to say, he was wanted to say, Heve shakud or shoked, we have to come back to that, be diligent or be eager, lilmod Torah, and in order to study Torah. V'da ma shetashiv la'Apiqoros, and know what you should answer to an Apiqoros, an Epicurean, a heretic. As I mentioned last week, the question is, some versions have the vav here, some don't. So the question is whether that is an independent obligation to know how to respond to an Apiqoros, or whether they're connected. In other words, that's actually knowing how to respond to intellectual and religious challenges is in fact a subsection or a natural outcome of studying Torah. Know before whom you toil, meaning God. And God will pay you back. God will pay you your reward. He'll give you your reward. He's reliable. Okay, sure, God is reliable. So we had last week I mentioned, and we sort of zeroed on the second sentence. What does it mean, Dama shetashiv la'Apiqoros? Who is an Apiqoros? What is an Apiqoros? So we started discussing that last week, and I mentioned that and this is what we're going to continue with today. And I mentioned that this Mishnah provides us with a sterling example of instances where the meaning of a word is far more reflective of the reality and the concerns of the person writing the commentary than providing for himself a sort of an attempt to understand what the words meant originally. In other words, in this case at least, Dama shetashiv la'Apiqoros, generation after generation of commentary, all the way down till today, I should add, viewed or defined the Apiqoros, the heretic, not as an Epicurean, a student of Democritus, who denied divine providence, denied morality, who basically said everything is by chance, and so on. But rather, he symbolizes or embodies or represents for each generation whatever the most serious, that person thought, the most serious challenge to Judaism was, and one has to fight them accordingly. So in other words, so that the word Epiqoros stays the same, the content, the identity of the Epiqoros, of the heretic, of the challenge changes. And sometimes it's a Jew, sometimes it's a non-Jew. And that part is interesting as well, because there is a definite, starts with, at least with Maimonides, it might be earlier. There are those who say, basically, they say when you have family, don't talk politics or religion. So similarly over here, don't talk religion with another Jew. You'll never get anywhere. You'll never convince them. If you're going to debate with a non-Jew. Somehow you expect to get a better deal from the non-Jew, or maybe it's, or perhaps it's less want, or less fraught. But those are the two lines that of interpretation that do sort of come down the pike. But as we'll see, they're not consistent. So let's jump ahead. Last week we talked about Epicureanism. We talked about the original meaning of the word Epicurus, coming from Democritus and so on. And now I want to jump ahead to another time and space. Now, from the time of the Talmud, from the time of Chazal, the word Epiqoros, it was no longer understood to refer to a Greek philosopher, but rather to be a generic. They understood they sort of Aramaized, that word, understood the word Epiqoros against a sort of Aramaic background, and they understood it to mean from the word Afkeruta. Afkeruta, hefker means ownerless. I mean, a person who rejects the basic tenets of Judaism. So Epiqoros would be fundamentally a Jew in this case, and a person who's aggressively rejects Judaism and aggressively rejects Jewish belief. Now, that brings us to the question of, as a friend of mine, a really dear friend of mine, Professor Malcolm Kellner has a book called "Must a Jew Believe Anything?" Is there such a thing as a dogma in the Jewish religion? He argues effectively no. There was his cue was taken by Professor Mark Shapiro in a book which I can't remember the name of right now because I wasn't going to talk about it. In which he goes through Maimonides' 13 principles of faith and examines them one after another, and he shows that for every single one that's there, it's pretty clear that there are those who say that it's not a dogma. So if you put it all together, you don't believe in anything. I think there's something fundamentally wrong with that approach, because there are even though there might not be precise consensus on exactly what the basic principles of Judaism are, there is a consensus as to what they are largely. And that's not a small thing. And Professor David Berger, in a review that he wrote of Professor Kellner's book, In Tradition, a number of years ago, made exactly that point. There is no Judaism without belief in God. There is no Orthodox Judaism without belief in the divine origin and the divine character of the Chumash, of the Torah. And denial of the existence of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the authority of Chazal to interpret the Torah along the along literary principles and legal principles that were part of the tradition. These you can quibble about this point or that point, but largely speaking, these are dogmas. These are dogmas. Dogmas not in the sense that the Christians have, that if you don't believe precisely this way, then you have no place in the church. But rather, sort of more broadly, that within a sort of range of belief, there certainly are beliefs that are axiomatic, or Russell would say postulates of traditional Judaism as we understand it, and not just as we understand it, but as traditionally we have understood it. So, in other words, there's a broader range of beliefs than is often accepted, and that refers to a large number of issues. On the other hand, there's a lot less give than one might otherwise think, or maybe other people would be happy. Certainly, the Mendelssohnian approach that we are a religion of orthopraxis, that we just keep mitzvot, doesn't matter what we believe, is absolutely wrong. It's a distortion of Judaism as it has always existed, and it's just not so. Why he came up with that, why he said that, it's another story. So the idea of social orthodoxy, where you don't have to believe anything, but you just do it. While I'm sure it has some ability, some validity, some value, not validity, but value, but that's up to God to decide. From a formal point of view, it's a non-starter. Yes, we are more interested in the performance of mitzvot, which are a form of worship of God, and within the range of emunah, which in the range of faith, there certainly is a wide range of discussion, but certain elements are certainly non-negotiable. The question is why is that concept of heresy or non-belief, is it relevant today? So, in the Middle Ages or in the pre-modern era generally, look, if you read the poskim, if you read the rabbis, you see that there are all kinds of things that happen to a heretic, and they rooted out, and all kinds of things. Most of that has no practical application today. Somebody wrote to me actually in the wake of last week's class, quoting properly the Chazon Ish, Rabbi Avraham Yishai Karaites, the famous leader of Haredi Orthodoxy, one of the towering figures of halacha in the 20th century, who in his commentary on Chulin says that you can't, in a time of secularism, of course, I think we go with this also, a time of secularism, a time that people are dazzled by Freud and by science, and they believe in they follow the science, they believe in the science. God gets lost, and they listen to, and they find the arguments of people like Dawkins and Hitchens very convincing, although I find them incredibly superficial. But that's another story. So therefore, you don't. The tag heretic is sort of lost its cachet. It might have been it's also lost its cachet and its power, not just because it's not relevant, but because it's overused. We pull out. We have a tendency, Jews especially, have a tendency to pull out the doomsday weapons in terms of discussion far too far too frequently and far too loudly. So as a result, we end up cheapening them. The same thing happened, by the way, with excommunication, even in the Middle Ages. When it was a rarely invoked penalty, it could be a very effective way of keeping people along the straight and narrow. When everybody was started excommunicating everybody else, towards the late Middle Ages, certainly in Ashkenaz, so okay, fine. So you excommunicate me, I'll go over there, and they won't listen to you. There is one area, though, which I think requires some thought. And I'm just posing this. I'm sort of thinking this through as we I've been thinking about this a lot, but there is one area in which it's fair to say that a person who does not subscribe to who does not find himself falling within the range of constructive and legitimate Jewish belief, it may impact his standing or her standing. What is that position? Well, there are, and here a follower of Soloveitchik in a very polemical speech that he gave in 1975. Which, if you take away the polemics from the speech, which he delivered to the rabbinic alumni, it's a famous Gerus Masora. It's out there; you can check it. It's even translated into Hebrew because it was used by people who are anti-modern to be able to wave the Rabbi Soloveitchik flag. In any event, it's still, if you take away the polemics from that speech, there still remains something to think about. Judaism, the Torah, is a system. Halacha works according to certain set rules. If one doesn't subscribe to the values of traditional Judaism, if one does not accept the postulates of the halachic system, again writ wide, then I think it's perfectly legitimate to say that such a person, while it should be respected, persecuted certainly, really does not have a right to participate in internal Orthodox discussions regarding observance. They can do what they want. They can set up their own synagogues, movements, and whatever they want. That's fine. I mean, that they will do that, and then God will decide whether things will last or not. But that's not the issue. The issue here is, does a person who summarily rejects the existence of God, summarily rejects the Sinaitic basic origins of Torah, a person who rejects the authority of the rabbis, a person who rejects the concept of a consensus, what's often called in halacha the sugya d'alma, the collective wisdom of the Jewish people, and so on. You reject all of those, or the nature of Tosher Belpeh in general. If a person rejects those principles, do they have a right? I mean, a principled right to tell people who do what to say, what to do, and so on. I think that there are certain ground rules. If you play by the ground rules, just like the umpire tells the managers of the two teams before every baseball game, these are the rules, and you have to play by those rules. If you accept those rules, that's fine. If you don't accept those rules, also fine. But don't play. You're not playing my game. You're playing another game. So you have no right to tell me how to live. I think that's. I think it's only fair. I think it's only respectful. So I think that's where this question of heresy or not heresy does have or Apiqoros does have a practical role. Now again, how are you going to define these things, and it can be abused, and a person could easily be expressing a totally normative Jewish position, which somebody else might not like. They'll say you're Apiqoros, and therefore you're in trouble. So that's a serious issue, because that's also a misuse of the term. There's an ongoing debate between various rabbis in the Orthodox community about the scientific expertise of the rabbis. Okay, and in the Talmud, there are those who are much more conservative, and they say no, everything the rabbi said was perfect, and and even in matters of science and history, we take everything literally. That's on the one hand. There were others following Maimonides and Dan Yitzchak Abravanel and all kinds of other and Gaonei Bavel, all kinds of people who say no, Chazal were experts, 100% experts when it came to halacha, because that's their métier. On the other hand, when it comes to science, they knew what they knew, and if we find out that scientifically things are not, or they changed from the way they were at the time of Chazal, then we have to take that in consideration and respect that. Now, both of those positions are legitimate Jewish positions. When the second position is offered, they'll say, "Well, it's Apiqoros." How can you say that? Rabbi Avram ben Rambam said that. It's clear the Rambam held that, maintained that position. Some of the greatest of the Gaonei Bavel held that way. I mean, it's not the. It's far from a non-Orthodox position. So they'll say, they find all kinds of tactics, all kinds of strategies to sort of fend off that criticism. So there you have a situation in which the continued existence of the word Apiqoros, or the term, actually distorts the range of acceptable beliefs, and we will, just like you can't say we shouldn't do something which is wrong, you shouldn't say something is wrong when it is actually correct or is actually legitimate. So it's not an easy situation, because to deny the fact that there is a limit to what can be considered Orthodox belief or acceptable belief, to deny that is a distortion. To term everything that I disagree with or find threatening as unacceptable is also a distortion. So that's not an easy point to negotiate, and I'm leaving it open, but that is my thinking on the matter. In any event, let's go back to history, where we know what happened, and more importantly, as I say about historians, we know how things ended. Okay, so who is the Apiqoros? So here it gets very interesting. If we jump from the 2nd century CE, when the Mishnah was formulated, and we jump ahead to the 13th century in France. Okay, now 13th century in France, in southern France, you go to the commentary on Avot by Rabbeinu Yonah Gerandi. Rabbeinu Yonah Gerandi is best known as he was the first cousin of the Ramban. He was also the Mechutin of the Ramban. He's best known as an ethicist. His book Sharei Tshuva is a classic of Jewish what's in repentance literature. It always sells out as we get run up to Chodesh Elul. Rav Yaakov Meidan from Har Tzion calls it Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Sanctum Sanctorum, the Holy of Holies. But aside from being an ethicist, by being extremely pious, he also was a first-rate Talmudist. He was, together with his cousin Ramban ben Nachmanides, he was responsible for the importation of the teachings of the Tosafists, of the Balei Tosafos from northern France, to Provence and then to Spain, and he was also active in the second Maimonidean controversy in the 1230s. In his commentary on Pirkei Avot, though he doesn't mention the commentary, it says as follows. He said on the line of know what to respond to an Apiqoros, he writes as follows. he says, what does this mean? What does it mean that you should study? He says, "Sheikba atzmo lilmod Torah." You should study, set yourself times to study Torah. Kedei sheyeda. So vida, as he sees, excuse me, he says that refuting an Apiqoros, refuting a heretic, is a subsection, is a legitimate reason for learning Torah. So he can respond to the Apiqoros. Because if he doesn't reply, if he doesn't debate him, remember last week we said that the word hashiv means to debate. If he doesn't take it, point by point in terms of the claims made by the other side, ushkarav and his lies, obviously, the rest of the world will be impressed and will absorb those ideas. And they'll drink the bad waters, the evil waters. Because he sees he's convincing. Then where's the other guy? Okay. And as a result, the God's name will be God forbid, desecrated. And the point is that if properly done, we can defeat any intellectual challenge that calls into question the bases or even the details of our religion. Rav Soloveitchik on one occasion said that he thinks there should be a 14th article of faith, and that is that the Torah can stand up to any intellectual challenge and can defeat any intellectual challenge and does not need to submit it to anybody. And then he defines who's the Apiqoros. This is the important part. No longer are we talking about Epicureanism and lack of morality and all this other stuff, but rather Apiqoros shebekan, he says, who kofer shebetorah shebal peh, v'hu adin lemorim shelo kahalacha. He says the Apiqoros here refers to a person who denies the oral law, and that same goes to people who decide halachic questions incorrectly. Okay, those are two separate things. One is people who are, I don't know to whom he's referring when it comes to people who are irresponsible and who issue halachic rulings that are baseless or which are wrong. But when it says kofar b'torah shebal peh, if somebody who denies the oral law, it's pretty clear to me of whom he's speaking. Because it seems to me that here he's talking about a Jewish Apiqoros. That seems to me to be the upshot. That was at least the way I read it. Mostly they can be read another way. So who could that be? So the only individuals who we could actually tag here are the Karaites. Now, Karaism, now we know there are 5 Karaites over here and 10 over there, and some of them live in Ramla, I think. And there's a bunch in France, and there's a bunch there were a bunch in Egypt, and there's like maybe there's 1,000 Karaites in the world, 2,000 Karaites in the world. Some are Jewish, some aren't Jewish. The ones who live in Lithuania and Crimea are not Jewish, and the ones who live in Egypt are Jewish. But you're talking about a negligible. I mean, there are more people living on my hill in Efrat than there are Karaites in the world. That wasn't always the case. When Karaism, which is a very complicated, multifaceted, and fascinating phenomenon, began to emerge in the middle of the 8th century CE in the Muslim orbit, it spread to the extent that it really gave Rabbinic Judaism a run for its money. What was it that the Karaim, what did they believe? The Karaim fundamentally believed that they denied the Torah Shebal Peh. They said there was a certain amount of give that you could have in terms of interpreting the Torah, but it was much more narrow than anything that the Chachmei Torah Shebal Peh, the rabbis, would admit. The rabbis were much more expansive because we had these rules of interpretation that were at the essence of the Torah Shebal Peh. They also denied any kind of authority. It was it's kind of Lutheran in this sense. Martin Luther also, part of the Reformation was the fact that there's no central authority. Everybody makes up their own mind. You have the Bible and you go and you figure it out what it means. So the same thing is the putative founder. He really wasn't the founder; he was a leading figure of Karaism, Anan ben David, is reputed to have said, "Chafisu b'oraita chapisu b'oraita tuva v'al tishanu al da'ati." Search out the meaning of the verses of the Torah extensively or deeply, but don't rely on me. Everything is very. So there were two issues over here: no Torah Shebal Peh and no central authority. And Karaism, for all kinds of reasons, which is not for now, spread. And there was a time in which Karaim constituted between 40 and 60% of the Jewish people. In other words, it could have become Judaism. And the Rabbinites fought back. Saadia Gaon was one of the leaders, but this is a major issue. A lot of books that we consider are central parts of our library, of the traditional Jewish library, of the Aron HaSfarim HaYehudi, were originally written as anti-Karaite polemics. So, for example, the Kuzari, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says that the Kuzari was originally created in answer to the Karaim, because the Karaim were incredibly popular and very extant. There were a lot of them specifically in Spain. There were large sections of the Rambam, of the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam, because there are a lot of Karaites in Egypt that are sort of unstated anti-Karaite polemic. This was a serious business, and because it was an internal Jewish polemic, his comment by Rabbeinu Yonah is extremely appropriate, because he says everybody knows Chumash, right? And you're fighting back and forth, and if you're not persuasive, you're going to lose them to the Karaites. Now, in the end, the Karaites lost, and as I said, they were a very small group. When the state of Israel was founded, there was some question about whether they were Jewish or not. So, in the end, Rav Ovadia Yosef Paskin and the ones from Egypt are, and the ones from Crimea aren't, and so on. Anyways, so the point here is that when Rabbeinu Yonah took a look and said, "What's an Apiqoros?" He says, "What's the biggest danger to Judaism today?" The answer is the Karayim, and that's what you have to learn how to fight. Havei shakod or shoked lilmod Torah v'dam asher takshiv l'Apiqoros, to the Karaite. He's the Apiqoros, no longer the different guy. Similar kind of threat, different guy. I say we're coming up to the end of the half hour. I'll just share with you just how intense the concern with Karaites was. Rabbi Ezrachi Halevi of Gerona was a 12th century scholar who was born in Gerona in Spain, in Catalonia, and then migrated to Provence, where he spent most of his life, and he returned towards the end of the century back to Gerona. He is best known for his commentary on Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi's halachot. It's called Sefer HaMaor, so he's called the Bala Maor. He locked horns consistently with his fellow student and rival Rabbi Avram ben David Posquier, the Ravid. And everybody who's learned Talmud Belamdanut knows that the big deal is to work through the Bala Maor and the Ravid and the defenses of the Rif against the Bala Maor by the Ramban, called the Milchamot Hashem. So he lived in 12th century. He lived in this orbit of France and Spain in the 12th century. Why am I telling you this whole story? Because sometimes rabbis reveal things about daily life when they even, just en passant, just by the way. At the end of his first comment on the third chapter in Masechet Shabbat, the third chapter in Masechet Shabbat, the first part of it deals with the question of the plata. What can you put on a plata? What you can't put on a plata? How do you plata? No plata? Can you put things back? And can you put it back in the fridge and back on the? I mean, all these things are based on that discussion. But the underlying issue there is having hot food for Shabbat. Now, having hot food for Shabbat was a point of contention, everybody knows, between the Stukim and the Prushim. And there were those, the Stukim said, no, you can't leave fire burning or leave anything warm on Shabbat. You have to put everything out before Shabbat. And Prushim said, no, if you light it before Shabbat, you can let it keep going. You can use that fire according to certain specific rules. Now, the Karaim, who were certainly spiritual descendants of the Stukim, It had to maintain the same position. So therefore, if you went to a Karaite home, they ate cold. They sat in the dark on Friday night, and they ate cold food on Shabbat. So says the Baal Ma'or. He goes into a big song of praise for hot food on Shabbat. Whether they ate chamin or they ate cholent or they ate whatever it was, that's a question because Provence is somewhere between Sfarad and Ashkenaz. So he says that, if you go to somebody's house and you see that they don't eat hot food on Shabbos afternoon, then there was a serious concern, serious suspicion that this person is a min, or an Apiqoros, a heretic. He's a Karaite, and that person should be sanctioned. And if he dies, he shouldn't even be buried by Jews. He should be buried by non-Jews. That's how. Okay. So that's pretty harsh. Okay, but it shows you the sort of the atmosphere of intense suspicion, and the atmosphere of almost a witch hunt. What happens? It's 85 degrees outside. It's 90 degrees outside, or by us it's 30 degrees. It's 35 degrees outside. Shabbat afternoon. I don't want to eat cholent. I'm not interested in eating chamin. I'm going to go to my local deli. I'm going to buy everything's going to be cold because we'll eat cold bishishwaz or I don't know, fruit soup, something, because it's too hot. This guy will come to my house and say, "Look he's not eating hot food." So you see that my house would be a problem because it'd be hot water anyways for coffee. Although in the 12th century there's no coffee, so another story. I say, "No, you report me to the police, and if I die, then they send me off to the Frank Campbell or the secular or whatever the Chaver Kadisha can have nothing to do with me." Because I'm already tarred, I'm already mocked as a heretic. So that observation, which he makes just sort of like the end of his discussion about Plato and what you do with Plato and Shabbat, is indicative of just how intense the threat of the Karaites was from the point of view of the rabbinites, certainly in Spain and quite likely in southern France as well. All right, we're going to stop there. I haven't finished describing and defining who the Apiqoros is. We only managed to get 2 in. Next week, Amir Tashem will finish, and we'll go back to what this question of the integration between, or the relationship between the Chovah l'Lmod Torah, the Shkod al Divrei Torah, and the ability to be able to respond to outside challenges, intellectual and religious. We will continue that discussion next time. So, in the meantime, be well, take care of yourselves, and have a great week.